Hello, and welcome back to the channel. Today, I present to you Scorn. Scorn is a first-person horror adventure game that takes place in an atmospheric nightmare universe that is planet Earth in a far-flung, desolate future. This industrial city of decay and the humanoids within are only vaguely familiar to the current-day human. The people of this society have mastered the art of the biomechanical, to their benefit and their undoing. Created by Serbian developer Ebb Software and published by Kepler Interactive, Scorn is, well, it's a very niche game to say the least. I myself have mixed feelings on this game. I do like it, I enjoyed my time with it, but there are some things. Despite its mostly positive reviews on Steam, there are many who either thought it was or downright bad. And despite generally liking the game myself, I can understand where they're coming from. There's a lot of reasons most don't care for this title. Terrible combat, empty world, too vague, it's boring, and much more. Except for the art, most people agree the art is its strongest point, with clear inspiration taken from the works of H.R. Giger and Zdzisław Beksiński.
And to be perfectly honest, when I finished my first playthrough, I was left thinking, was this some kind of artsy-fartsy game that went over my head? And, well, kinda, yeah.
But once I stepped back and dove deeper into the lore and themes the game was presenting to me, I changed my opinion. I think Scorn is trying to tell a story, one that's fused with metaphors, of course, but a story nonetheless. The thing is, it goes about its storytelling in a purely environmental way. There are no notes, no recordings, no dialogue. You really have to pay attention to everything you see. Taking a quote from the art book, Scorn: The Art of the Game by Matthew Pellet, CEO and game director Lyubomir Pekler wanted to make a game with no direct comparison. And I'd say he achieved that. With the aid of the art book, I will attempt to tell this story in the most coherent way I can, which is a colossal task for me because I'm not a smart person. Also, YouTube. I'm discussing art, okay? It's not real, it's just art, okay? With that said, if you're squeamish at all about mentions or discussions of body horror and gore and all that comes with those themes, then maybe skip this one. I'll have to censor some of it, so I won't be showing the worst, but it is there. Now, with that out of the way, let's dive into Scorn. The very first cutscene depicts Scorn Guy, that's what I'm gonna call him for now, breaking out of some root-like growths that have him pinned to the floor of what looks like to be a dank cavern. As he crawls, the scene will switch back and forth between this one and one of a desolate plain with a looming tower in the distance, before the ground crumbles beneath him and sends him plummeting into the depths of the assembly. This assembly is a factory of sorts. Not that you would recognize it as such right away, but once he makes it to this central chamber, these alien contraptions start taking on the familiar tone of an assembly line. In spirit, at least. As Scorn Guide travels the halls and rooms of this location, you'll come to notice how detailed every surface is, as if the people of this world value aesthetics even within an industrial setting. However, upon closer inspection, the material that makes up not only the building, but, well, every single thing, looks odd. It doesn't really look like metal or wood or any other fabricated material we know of. It looks like an old, decayed, and fossilized corpse, which is kind of what it is. As you proceed through the world of Scorn, you'll come to realize that the people of this world took recycling to the extreme. Nothing is wasted here, not even the dead. There are a couple different, variations of humanoid and fauna in this world, and the mold men have suffered the most out of all of them. Their entire lifespan from birth to death is nothing but pain and misery. They are bred as bodies to be utilized, mostly to be recycled into building material, it seems. These poor creatures go from birth to being packed in these molds, sometimes multiple bodies packed tightly and sealed up for transport. Much like packaged meat at the supermarket. Except there was no one here advocating for free-ranged mole men. Then they were shipped to this location to either be scooped from their packages and processed as building material, or cut free to be used in another manner, which I assume they'd be used for some type of labor, but maybe they were used for reproduction. What we do know is that the world was cruel to them. They were not given names. They were not treated with any kind of thought. They're not people to the former inhabitants of this land. They're just a product. That's all they are. And they could do absolutely nothing about it. They were bred to be defenseless and hold no self-preservation instincts. They hold an obedience that would make any world government salivate at the thought. What makes this all the more worse is how innocent they look. Yeah, this guy looks deformed, but look at his eyes. They're so innocent, and I felt so horrible for doing him dirty. You do have the option to spare him, but he'll be left to rot here all by himself. Is that fate any better than the other option? So now that I'm feeling like a right bastard, I think it's time for me to move on to the next section of this factory. Welcome to a forest of moldy dicks. Actually, they're called tissue towers. And once Scorn Guy activates the machinery here, these flying bulbous things come out and begin misting the tissue towers to hydrate them with some type of fertilizer. And then there's the giblet tree in the center. It seems to be some sort of storage tower or power tower. I'm not sure how it functions exactly. Scorn Guy inserts some cylinders full of what looks like white goo into it, which makes the shutters rise, revealing the world outside. However, once the last cylinder is inserted, the tree overloads and explodes, knocking Scorn Guy onto his back. Then all the funky porridge pours out and covers Scorn Guy, melting him to the floor, trapping him like an overglazed cinnamon roll. And while this is the end of our perspective from Scorn Guy, it won't be the end of him. You see, the intro cutscene was actually a combination of the beginning and ending of this section with him. I'll explain more when we get there. The next scene gives us the perspective of another Scorn Guy. We're gonna call him Scorn Guy 2. Electric Boogaloo. We witness his burst from the Genesis wall. Yes, this is how Scorn Guys are made. I bet there could have been some really cool lore to explain this wall. But a quote from the art book from Peckler himself says, "This is the main character's genesis expressed visually. There's nothing more to it than that. How did it come into being? Why is it this way? That we are not explaining." So it's just another metaphor for the drama of birth and the futility of most life. Because as we see, once he falls from the pod, he lands next to the decayed husks of his brethren who weren't as fortunate as he was to survive this birthing process. Those that are born from pods high up on the wall seem to have a near zero chance of survival, unless they are hardy or lucky enough to withstand the impact. But Scorn Guy 2 has avoided that fate, and now that the umbilical has been detached, Scorn Guy 2 can freely walk on his 2 feet. What greets him is the view of a dead world. The field presents a barren wasteland only occupied by the corpses of Scorn Guys who perished on the way to their destination, left to decay into dried husks and have their petrified flesh flake off into the wind. There's also these massive flesh roots that spread across the field, which seem to be coming from some of these structures that kind of look like space pods or something, but in actuality, they're just vents for the nearby facility. What I like the most from this section is seeing the towering structures off in the distance, mostly obscured by fog or dust. That evokes the sense of awe from me. It's really cool. I think the fields are my favorite part of this game. There's something fascinating about exploring a world once teeming with life, now empty and lifeless, with only the remnants of what once was left to tell the story. I mean, that's Scorn in a nutshell itself, but the field is the best visual representation of it on a global scale. Even the ambient sound is horrific in a way. It sounds like the last chorus of a dying world. Eventually, Scorn Guy 2 will seek shelter in a nearby structure. A structure that will become somewhat recognizable once we enter. However, before we can really observe our surroundings, we'll be greeted by another life form, some kind of creature crawling along the walls before it dips out of view. Is it friend or foe? It's hard to tell for now, but what isn't hard to tell is where we are. Take a look at this room. This is the same room that our first Scorn guy got cocooned in. It looks slightly different, of course, because it's been flooded with the white goo, but the pillars in the giblet tree are still there. We just happen to be on the upper railing instead of down on the floor below. Venturing further, it seems like this creature is trying to lead Scorn Guy 2 somewhere, as it slaps the wall with its tail. Its tail that has a weapon attached to it. Following its lead, Scorn Guy 2, Return of the Scorn, will have to venture through what looks like a heart, complete with travelable ventricle tubes. In one, it's blocked by a cart full of mole man bodies, just left to rot forever. Moving to the next one leads him to this room with a dead pod. Inside that dead pod is a dead Scorn Guy. Curious, very curious, for there's another pod we can interact with in this factory, and it's still living for the most part. Once we get all the rings on this thingy, Scorn Guy 2 and Paris can figure out this puzzle in order to activate the pods to retrieve this, key that opens doors, and a pod that holds health and ammunition. I just said pod a lot. Once he takes those items, the pod next to the pedestal opens and a figure crawls out of it, only to shortly pass out or die. He's dead. Now, it's pretty obvious this guy does not look like our Scorn Guy. He's sleeker, smoother, thicker. He's what we're gonna call a Polis people. Not Polish, Polis. This is not how Polish people are born. I don't think. Can someone in the comments confirm that? Polis people are the ones who live in Polis, or the Citadel. Not that one. This one. But we aren't quite there yet, so I'll come back to that. But right now, Scorn Guy 2 will need to head deeper into the assembly. But before Scorn Guy 2 Scorn Harder can get even that far, our little friend decides now is the perfect time for the tightest hug anyone's ever been given. Once this thing, known as the parasite, decides to give us a close-up, we can see its head is a brain, and below it is half a skull, and it also sports these wood-like growths. That may not be important now, but it will later. At least he has the punchy gun now, courtesy of his new parasitic pal. But what is this parasite? Where did it come from? Well, for once, I have an actual, definitive answer for you, and it may be the only one we get throughout this whole video. Remember the entrance room where Scorn Guy 1 got smothered in white goo? If you go back and check the floor, you'll notice a hole where Scorn Guy 1 used to be. I can say without a doubt that the parasite latched on to Scorn Guy 2 is Scorn Guy 1 who was deformed or transformed while in the goo. I believe his story goes something like this. Scorn Guy 1 is born from the wall. He drags himself towards the assembly and then falls into the depths below. That's when we take control. Then, after the explosion and him consequently being knocked out and covered in goo, he was transformed into the parasite over an unknown period of time. Due to how he was laying on his stomach with one side of his face on the floor, his body seemed to have almost melted like plastic exposed to too much heat, deforming into the parasite we see now, complete with punch gun attached to its tailspine. He eventually woke up and broke free, and then Scorn Guy 2 comes along, and here we are. As for why it decides to latch on to Scorn Guy 2, the second one, that's where speculation comes in. There isn't any concrete answer for that one, but I think he sees him as a shell to inhabit and fuse with. I know that doesn't make any sense right now, but it will later. As for now, Scorn Guy 2, back to the Scorn, is just gonna have to get comfortable with Scorn Guy 1 tickling his liver. If he even has a liver. After taking the elevator, Scorn Guy 2 will be in another part of the factory. In here you'll see these flesh root growths just like we saw outside on the surface, which means they're coming from somewhere connected to this assembly. Along these roots are clusters of another type of creature. The art book names these as crater creatures, so that's what I'm gonna call them. There are a handful of different types of these creatures. Some are ranged, and some will charge at you like a bull. However, all of them will mostly ignore you, though there are some who have enough life in them to take offense to Scorn Guy 2 invading their territory. Now, I've been told for the majority of these encounters, our protag can just hide out of sight and wait them out, as they will eventually leave. However, I didn't get the memo until after I'd finished my playthrough, so I just kinda decimated all I came across. Here's where I'll say, the combat isn't fun, but it isn't the worst either. It's just simple and a little clunky, so I can take it or leave it. But I do hate the punch gun. I hate everything about it. Very short range, very slow. It's the worst of the worst. Anywho, while the parasite will be helpful in holding Scorn Guy 2's ammo pod, it unfortunately will also bury its hands into his abdomen again and again as their journey continues, which will take some health away every time. Health dispensers aren't the most common thing, so this can be a problem if you're prone to getting hurt often. There's also the fact that eventually you'll begin seeing growth spring from Scorn Guy's body, signaling something potentially not good is going on with this symbiotic relationship. But they're stuck together for the time being, so he's gonna have to suck it up and power through. Soon he'll see the structure in the distance. It looks kind of like an alien spaceship ready to abduct and probe some booty, if you know what I mean. You've also probably noticed that the red meaty cables have gotten more prevalent in this area. It's definitely hinting that Scorn Guy 2 is getting closer to the source of all this. That source happens to be in the location known as the crater. Deep in the bowels of this mid-pangled tit. The f*** is a mid-pangled tit? Deep in the bowels of this meat-tangled pit sits the queen mother of all the crater creatures in existence. And she is massive. And kinda looks like this dude. I feel like that's definitely paying homage to I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. The Crater Queen sits atop a plinth and bursts these crater creatures at a rapid pace. These corrupting tendrils are the sticky substance that the crater creatures spread, building up layer upon layer as they travel the same paths. There are also thick cords of interlocked creatures doomed to live and die in this connected chain of bodies where escape is only for those strong enough to break free. It seems no matter what or where you are in this world of Scorn, everyone and everything lives an awful existence. Everything about this world is pain, misery, and trauma. The Crater Queen is no exception. She's been stuck down here for possibly thousands of years, just constantly spewing out meat babies in her perpetual, unending existence. Until Scorn Guy 2 needs to use the elevator. I am so sorry. And now I feel bad again, which should be ridiculous because, look! But also, look! I just feel bad for her. Hell, I even feel bad for the meat muppets who don't have any deeper thought than a primal instinct to consume and spread. This is the Mold Man situation all over again. All I bring is pain. Who can say? I have to give it to Ebb. They did an excellent job at conveying half of Friedrich Nietzsche's philosophical idea of to live is to suffer, to survive is to find meaning in the suffering. I've yet to find the meaning in all this suffering. The good news is that elevator put Scorn Guy 2 on the path to Polis, the final destination. Well, hello there. The people of Polis revered sex, death, and rebirth to a religious degree. There are many reliefs and sculptures that depict the act with a corpse-like aesthetic. This Freudian idea of the life and death drives expressed in a literal way shows the dichotomy this whole civilization is based on. And before you congratulate me on forming a sentence that sounded really smart, I just reworded what the art book said. Man, I really need to read more philosophy. There are also depictions of pregnancy, something they seem to hold in very high regard considering they even molded these ceremonial shells to mimic the pregnant belly. Reproduction is the backbone of their beliefs, so much so that even though they no longer have traditional births due to their great feats of engineering, they still revere it as a precursor to what they have now. To the Polis people, the body is nothing more than parts to be recycled into something else. Thus, efficiency was king when it came to selectively eliminating parts of themselves they no longer needed. Mouths, for one. As you can see, not one creature here actually has a mouth. I imagine they may have had some telepathic communication going on. And as for food, I don't know. It's possible they get their nutrients some other way, or maybe they don't eat at all. I can say that if they did eat, what they ate probably didn't taste good because it was probably just a protein goo made out of the recycled dirt. A la the Matrix or Soylent Green.
Soylent Green is people!
What was I talking about? Oh yeah, so aside from the mouths, you also don't see any female Polis people here. All the bodies are male. The only place you see females are in the murals and sculptures. Since the Polis people have reached a level of bioengineering that rendered actual childbirth redundant, without the need for women to give birth, they were basically edited out of the gene pool. Or maybe the devs just didn't feel like making any female models. But let's assume it isn't that for the sake of theorizing. Now, I know that sounds harsh, and some may get offended by this notion, but you kinda need to look at it from their perspective. They didn't get rid of females because they didn't like them. It was simply easier to make everything as streamlined as possible, and as previously stated, the body was nothing to them. The only thing that mattered was what the body was housing, the consciousness. In fact, the consciousness was so important to them that they came up with a way to ascend. What the purpose of this ascension was, we'll never truly know. It could be because their world was dying and they were ready for the rapture, or ready to live as ascended beings on another plane of existence. Either way, consciousness was vitally important to them, so important that everything was designed to achieve this goal of rebirthing the consciousness into a preferred physical form. And that's what Scorn Guy's 2 goal is, the goal that he's been born with, seeming to have an innate knowledge from birth that this is what he's supposed to do. However, he's got some other stuff to do before he can take his place on the Wheel of Pain. Downstairs, Scorn Guy 2 will find 2 inactive shells. These shells sport the pregnant belly look, though this is more of a ceremonial decorative addition rather than a functioning one as previously mentioned. To activate these stoic shells, he'll need to gather this red fluid. It looks exactly like the red fluid Scorn Guy 2 uses to heal himself. But we just can't give them our red Kool-Aid. We gotta get some fresh. That's where these fugly homunculi munchkins come in. Jesus, that's a face only a mother could love. These guys can be found in a room that also houses this universe's version of cyborgs. These Borgs are made out of, well, what do you think? What everything else is. Recycled bodies. And this hollow spot is where the homunculus jars are fitted so they can power and pilot the cyborgs. We don't need them to pilot the cyborgs right now, but we do need these sweet ugly blobs out of their jar. Why he couldn't just smash the jar without putting it in the cyborg? I'm just gonna throw out a wild guess and assume these things need to be awakened before they can be pressed into juice. Yes, we are actually pressing them for juice. I did not make that up. According to the art book, these homunculi were artificially created while seeking a different kind of living substance for consumption. They are apparently made of a hallucinogenic matter that people use to reach higher states of consciousness. So when we juice them, we get a vial full of sweet, sweet ceremonial drugs. If this red liquid is the same that Scorn Guy 2's been using to heal, does that mean he's been tripping balls for most of this journey? That would explain a lot. In any case, one wasn't enough. We need a total of 3. Unfortunately for Scorn Guy 2, the next cyborg loaded in actually has limbs. So when the next homunculus is placed inside, we got a fight on our hands. Once Scorn Guy 2 beats the cyborg by playing a ring around the rosy and the cyborg falls down, he can grab that sweet grenade launcher. That's fine. This is fine. Alright, after the second time of whooping ass, Scorn Guy 2 can grab the grenade launcher and the juice bag. In you go, little buddy. That leaves just one more. This fight will be trivial since Scorn Guy 2 has the grenade launcher. He can just arc one right into the ammo storage on its back and boom goes the dynamite. Though you can now see the parasite's growths have progressed so far that the gun is now fused to his hand. At least it waited till he had the grenade launcher and not the punch gun. But this is still bad news. These growths are now happening rapidly, to the point that Scorn Guy 2 can't use either of his hands unless he inflicts even more pain on himself by shoving his arm in yet another hole to have these root tendrils hacked off. This is only temporary though, they will quickly grow back. Scorn Guy 2 has no other choice now than to remove this parasite. He finds an extraction chair, which debatably could be used for this exact purpose, but I think it was just a piece of equipment meant for the cyborgs to use on themselves since we do see a few of them in the same room. Still, the nature of this chair doesn't really matter at the moment. The parasite seems to sense what's about to happen and freaks out, impaling Scorn Guy's abdomen, violently exposing his insides to the outside. But yet again, Scorn Guy is built different and manages to straddle the chair and take control of it even in his badly wounded state. Here, we'll finally get a view of the parasite that's been with us this whole time. And would you look at that? I told you it was Scorn Guy 1. Once Scorn Guy 2 uses the claw to yank the parasite from his body, it squirms and wiggles in desperation before it manages to free itself and scamper off. We all know that won't be the last we see of him. I want to take a second to discuss this parasite a little more before we move on. When you enter the Citadel, there are a few murals on display. This one in particular is interesting because it shows a vivisected humanoid on one side, a shell on the other, and what's called a proto-creature in the center, in which its tentacles drape over the human and shell's heads at the bottom. This seems to be an artistic representation of transference. The humanoid's consciousness is joined to the shell via this proto-creature. The art book explains this process, but some of the things in the book aren't in the game. However, this proto-creature is in the book and the game, and if we examine it closely, we can see that the parasite and this proto-creature share some similarities. If we look at the head of the parasite, we can see that the brain has tried to separate from the body, and the skin flaps seem to be a stubby, deformed version of the proto-creature's, wings? Then there are these growths which look like they could be stunted tentacles. I fully believe that the parasite is a botched form of the proto-creature, because it was formed via an accident instead of the precise method they probably normally used. It's hard to tell because some of this I'm literally just making up as I go. There is no real evidence for it in game, but I have to bridge the gap somehow, so bear with me. However, no matter how it got made and how it isn't a true proto-creature, it still has that drive to inhabit a shell. There were no shells around for it to inhabit in the assembly, so when Scorn Guy 2 showed up, through misguided instincts, it tried to inhabit him like it would a shell. I think this is an excellent representation of themes of entropy in Scorn with how random and disordered this parasite was created and looks compared to the proto-creature. Speaking of proto-creatures in Ascension, now that Scorn Guy 2 is free of the parasite, he can finally get on with the transference. However, he is grievously wounded, so he doesn't have a lot of time left. He's gotta get it done now. After hobbling back to the shells, Scorn Guy 2 uses the last of the liquid, and once he does, these flower-like things bloom open from the central eye, which seems to awaken the proto-creature within the shell. This means it's now ready to be inhabited by a consciousness. Scorn Guy 2 will take his place on the Wheel of Pain, and much like the other bodies on show, begins to be vivisected while his Long Dong Johnson gets vacuumed. The pain and pleasure are part of achieving a higher consciousness according to the Polis people. This is a religious ceremony. A fucking weird one, but one nonetheless. While all that's going on, this boy's head cap gets cut open and his brain tissue joined with the web nexus above him. This frees his consciousness from his body, acting as a conduit, so now he can control the shells. It takes 2 to open the door, but for some reason, there isn't enough weight on the pedestal for it to open. Thus, he pilots the shell back to his body, removes one of the cutting arms and attaches it to the shell so that the cutting can still occur even when he's removed from the chair and carried to his true final destination. As predicted, this doesn't go to plan. The world of Scorn is a world of scorn. As he's mere steps away from entering the portal, or whatever it is, he loses connection to the hive mind and is back in his original body. He's dropped to the floor, and as he weakly reaches out for salvation, his old friend the Parasite shows up. And this time, it doesn't want to merely ride on his back. It wants a full fusion with them, and he's too weak to fight it off. Even though he's only feet from his goal, he'll never make it. In the end, he becomes one with the Parasite, which begins its own bastardized version of fusion with Scorn Guy 2, ensuring that neither will ever ascend. They will forever be rooted to this plane, their backs turned to the true path. And that's the end. It's not a happy story, or maybe it is a happy story. It depends on what you took away from it, to be honest. But that's not the end of this video, because we need to talk about this whole ascension thing and what it actually is and how to achieve it. This is where the main problems come into play for me, due to there being a large amount of either cut content or content that was never implemented. The information on this can be very confusing and vague. We also have to consider that even the creators of this game said that there wasn't a well-defined story, that Peckler had themes he wanted to express and experiment with pretty much.
That doesn't mean they didn't come up with a story along the way, but it is something to keep in mind when trying to figure out something that might not be meant to be figured out. But I am going to try anyway. So, here we go.
We begin at the beginning, Scorn Guy's birth. All Scorn Guys are birthed from the Genesis Wall. Before the society kicked the proverbial bucket, they would retrieve these born from the wall and ship them to the various parts of the complex. Some would go to factories to work and others go to Polis. This was determined probably by how many they needed and where. Once they reached their destinations, they'd be placed in these red pods, which would further incubate them and form an exoskeleton in order to better survive the harsh world they lived in. This further development time also had them forming a third eye. Meanwhile, the proto-creatures were formed by carefully dousing a humanoid in the white goo, and they're stored in those tissue towers until they're fully formed. Then, they are placed inside of a sarcophagi with the shell on top so they could begin inhabiting said shell. When a Polis humanoid and the shell were ready, the red hallucinogenic homunculi liquid would be applied to the shell, which would awaken the proto-creature, causing its third eye to bloom open in order to receive the consciousness of the humanoid whom would be on the wheel. Once the humanoid was ready, they would be strapped to the wheel, sucked and cut while their brain matter was linked to the nexus, which then allowed them to control whichever shell they wanted. Once this happened, the controlled shell would make its way to the portal and cross over. Here is where a fusion between the consciousness, the proto-creature, and the shell would occur, eventually evolving into its final stage, the ascended form, And from there, who knows? Maybe they stay in that portal, living on a different plane of existence, or maybe they come back. There's no evidence for either or, so make up what you will. So that all sounds pretty similar to what Scorn Guy 2 did. However, I believe he was too hasty in his endeavor and missed a crucial step in the ceremony. He never incubated further, thus attempted this procedure with an underdeveloped mind and body. I believe this is the key reason he didn't reach the portal. He grew too weak to sustain the connection. As for why he chose to take his body with him, I believe it's because the door malfunctioned and it wouldn't open with just the shell standing on the pedestal. I don't think that he just couldn't leave his body behind because he had an attachment to it. No, not after all he went through to get this far. I think it was simply out of his control. So he did the only thing he could think to do and grabbed his body up for the extra weight. As for why he took one of the cutting arms, perhaps because he needed to keep the pain in order to remain in that higher consciousness state. And that's why he was carried almost all the way to the portal. He couldn't just leave his body on the ground because he needed the stimulation of pain to keep going. As far as what would have happened if he managed to bring both his body and the shell into the portal, I have no idea, and he probably didn't either, but he was desperate. Then his connection was severed because he was just too weak at this point. Consider that not only was he still in his unincubated form, he also had just experienced a very traumatic injury that already made him weaker than normal before he even made it to the wheel. Could he have still ascended even if he didn't incubate further? Possibly, but we'll never know. Of course, this isn't gospel. This is just my interpretation of the story and events via what I observed in-game and a little extra information from the art book. There's one more thing I haven't touched on yet, and those are the humanoids on display in the central room. These are clearly Polis people. They have no collars, and though it's hard to see, there's the presence of an unopened third eye, something the Scorn guys don't have before incubation. I believe they are here because they are honoring the corpses. Maybe these were important people, maybe they were the first or the last to go through this process. In either case, they are more symbolic than an actual representation of how all the bodies were treated after transference. There's also the exploration of themes and metaphors of scorn. Scorn is defined as the feeling or belief that someone or something is worthless or despicable. I believe this is shown thoroughly throughout the game. The Polis people scorned everything. They believed everything was beneath them. The Moldmen, the Homunculi, the Crater Queen, and all and everything else to exist other than their own consciousness, which includes scorning their own original bodies. The themes of existence, entropy, and the relationship between human beings and technology are readily apparent throughout Scorn as they are the three core themes. However, there are also themes of transcendence, body horror, life and death, religion, classism, enlightenment, and escapism, and, probably more than I can even think of. There are metaphors for the industrialized meat industry presented as the Moldmen, or cancer, showing the crater creatures expanding these sinewy meat roots like a cancerous growth on the world. Then there's the destruction of one's own planet through the hubris of technology and progress, and the destruction of one's own humanity in the same process. They got rid of natural childbirth, which got rid of the bonds between child and parent. With these bonds gone, empathy deteriorated away, leaving only efficiency. With empathy gone, emotions are moot, redundant. All that's left is a singular drive to escape the hell of their own making. And Scorn as a whole is a metaphor for... well, shit, what is it a metaphor for? Asking that question is like asking someone to choose a card from an infinite deck and all are the right answer, because it's a metaphor for whatever you choose depending on your own interpretations. That sounds like a cop-out, and maybe it is, but blame the devs, not me. My belief is that Scorn is a metaphor for searching for the meaning of life when there is no meaning. Because ultimately, looking for the answers to why and how in this game are ultimately pointless. It's an absurd, surrealist artist's depiction of a number of ideas and themes that are ultimately not meant to be explored, but to be observed and accepted as such. Let go of trying to figure this out and just enjoy the ride. But that's just my take. In the end, I'm glad I played Scorn because it was an interesting, if not painful, journey. And while this title was ultimately not satisfying to me, that doesn't mean it isn't to others, and I encourage more niche games like this to be created, even if I'm not the target audience. I think it's important to not always appeal to the masses, otherwise you end up with homogenized slop. Although I will add, I absolutely love the art style. I've loved Geiger's work for a long time, and I didn't know of Bakchinski until now, but I love his work too. So, thanks for that, Scorn. I'm eager to hear all of your theories, from what this ascension was, what you think happened to the world of Scorn, and how did they operate? What themes and metaphors did you pick up on? And heck, anything else you can think of. Y'all always have some interesting theories that broaden my understanding of the subject. Working on this video has been a journey for sure. I went through the gamut of emotions from anger, irritation, shame, sadness, awe, curiosity. Well, I don't think curiosity is an emotion, but I felt it all the same. It took a great deal of analyzing in-game events and environments for me to piece together my thoughts on this theory. Much like the transferal procedure Scorn Guy 2 goes through, there was both pleasure and pain. Mostly pain, as those who follow me on X or Twitter or whatever the hell you want to call it can attest to. So I think I've covered everything I can. If I missed anything, let me know. If you've stuck around this long, you are the GOAT. Be sure to like and subscribe if you would be so kind, and leave a comment. I really like those. And I do have a super thanks if you'd like to donate to the channel. All money goes directly back into this channel in the form of music, effects, purchasing titles to cover, and purchasing the coffee I need to edit these bad boys. You of course do not have to donate a dime if you can't or don't want to. That money was hard earned, and I know there's not a lot to go around these days. Just watching is enough. You all are awesome, and I love you. Platonically. From a distance. Like a good parasocial relationship should be. Seriously though, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you again on The Midnight Goat.